I used to believe my marriage was the safest place in the world, a sanctuary built on love, trust, and loyalty. My husband and I had been together for years, and through every storm, I thought we stood hand in hand. He was charming, responsible, and to me, the definition of a good man. His friends, though loud and sometimes a little too playful, were part of his world, and by extension, part of mine. They were always around, at family dinners, late-night hangouts, and casual weekend gatherings. I accepted them because I trusted him, and in my heart, I trusted that they respected the boundaries of our marriage. At first, everything seemed ordinary. They would laugh, drink, and share stories that made no sense to me, but I stayed polite, smiling at their jokes and offering them food and tea whenever they visited. My husband always assured me that these men were like his brothers, that they would protect me if anything ever happened. I believed him without a second thought. After all, why wouldn't I? Love has a strange way of making you blind to red flags. But there were moments I could never quite explain to myself. Sometimes, I caught one of them staring too long when I walked by, his eyes lingering in a way that made my skin crawl. Another would always find excuses to sit beside me, brushing his arm against mine as though by accident. Their laughter sometimes carried hidden meanings, like they were sharing a private joke that I wasn't meant to understand. Whenever I mentioned it to my husband, he brushed it off with a laugh, telling me not to be so sensitive. "They're just joking," he'd say, and I forced myself to believe him. It was a Friday evening when everything began to change. My husband had invited him over, as he often did, to watch a game and drink together. The house was filled with noise, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and the scent of alcohol. I stayed busy in the kitchen, preparing snacks and making sure everyone was comfortable, like the good host I was expected to be. But then, out of nowhere, my husband's phone rang. He stepped out to take the call, and before I realized what was happening, he was grabbing his car keys. He told me he had to rush out to handle something urgent and would be back soon. The door closed behind him, and suddenly, I was left alone in the house with his friends. The laughter quieted, and the energy in the room shifted in a way I couldn't quite explain. My heartbeat grew faster, a strange unease creeping over me. I tried to distract myself, moving dishes around, pretending to be busy, but I could feel their eyes on me. What once felt like casual company now felt like something darker, something dangerous, though I didn't yet understand the storm that was about to unfold. The silence that followed my husband's departure was heavier than any noise. His friends sat sprawled across the living room, their eyes darting between the TV and me, though the game no longer seemed to hold their interest. I could feel the gaze, sharp and invasive, as if they were peeling away every layer of my comfort. I forced a smile, asked if they needed anything, and tried to escape back into the kitchen. But one of them chuckled, a low laugh that made my stomach tighten, and said, "Why so shy? We're all friends here." I laughed nervously, pretending not to notice the edge in his tone. I reminded myself that these were my husband's closest companions, men he trusted, men he called brothers. Yet the way they looked at me in that moment was nothing like friendship. Their eyes were hungry, lingering, unashamed. One of them followed me into the kitchen under the pretense of helping. He leaned too close when he reached for a glass, his arm brushing mine deliberately. I stepped aside quickly, my pulse racing. "It's fine, I can handle it," I muttered, trying to sound casual. But he only smirked, his eyes scanning me in a way that made my skin crawl. When I returned to the living room with the snacks, the atmosphere had changed even more. The jokes had become suggestive, their laughter carrying a different weight now. They teased each other openly, making comments I wasn't sure were aimed at me or at the situation they were trying to create. I kept my head down, placing the bowls on the table, but one of them reached out, brushing his fingers against mine as I set the plate down. His touch lingered far longer than necessary, and I pulled my hand back quickly. "You're always so quiet," another said, his voice taunting. "Your husband doesn't let you have any fun, does he?" The others laughed, and though it sounded like banter, I could feel the sinister undertone behind their words. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. I tried to excuse myself, saying I had chores to finish upstairs, but they blocked the way with casual movements, as though it was all an accident. My throat tightened, and fear began to claw at me. These were not harmless jokes anymore. This was something else, something darker. They began circling me with their words, complimenting me in ways that felt more like traps than flattery. One said my husband was lucky, another added that sometimes a woman deserved more attention than one man could give. Their laughter grew louder, but behind it was a dangerous energy, one that stripped away any illusion of safety. And then, as though some unspoken agreement passed between them, the teasing turned into boldness. One of them stepped closer, too close, his breath hot against my skin as he whispered words I don't dare repeat. Another placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, not playful anymore. Panic surged through me, my instincts screaming that I was surrounded. That was the moment I realized, they were no longer just my husband's friends. They were predators circling prey, and I was the prey. My trust, my marriage, and my safety were unraveling in front of me. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I was trapped, alone, and their intentions were becoming terrifyingly clear. The hours that followed felt like an endless blur, a nightmare I couldn't wake from. When the house finally grew quiet again, I was left standing in the middle of the living room, my body trembling, my spirit hollow. I felt as though the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of everything that had just happened. My mind screamed at me to make sense of it, to find clarity, but instead I was swallowed by a heavy, paralyzing silence. When my husband finally returned later that night, I couldn't bring myself to look him in the eye. My heart broke with every step he took toward me, every word he spoke as though nothing had changed. He smiled, asked if his friends had behaved themselves, completely unaware, or perhaps unwilling to see, the storm inside me. I forced a smile, nodded, and whispered that everything was fine. The lie burned my throat like poison, but the truth was too heavy to carry to him. Days passed, but the shadows of that night clung to me. I found myself shrinking into silence, avoiding my husband's gaze, avoiding his touch. Every time he reached for me, I felt myself flinch, my body betraying the turmoil I tried to bury. At night, I would lie awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the echo of his friends' laughter and the weight of their eyes on me. I felt tainted, broken, and yet I hadn't done anything wrong. Still, shame sat on my chest like a stone. The worst part was the questions that gnawed at me in the dark. Did my husband know what kind of men he had surrounded himself with? Did he sense their hunger when they looked at me? Or worse, did he send them to test me, to measure my loyalty in a way that no woman should ever have to endure? The thought ate at me, twisting my love into suspicion, turning every tender memory into a cruel reminder of betrayal. I tried to convince myself to speak, to confess everything to him, but each time I opened my mouth, the words died before they could escape. How could I tell him? How could I look into his trusting eyes and shatter the image of his closest friends? How could I admit the things that had been done to me, knowing it would change our marriage forever? And even if I told him, would he believe me, or would he look at me with the same suspicion they had planted in my heart? I began to withdraw, hiding behind routines, burying myself in silence. To him, it probably looked like exhaustion, maybe even indifference. But inside, I was at war with myself. I loved him, yet I no longer felt safe in his world. The people he trusted most had turned into monsters before my eyes, and I didn't know if I could forgive him for letting them so close to me. I would catch him watching me sometimes, his brow furrowed as though he could sense something was wrong. And still, I stayed silent. Because the truth wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about a marriage built on love, now cracked with suspicion. And I didn't know if speaking the truth would save us, or destroy us completely. I couldn't live inside my silence forever. Each day that passed felt heavier, like I was carrying a secret that was eating me alive from the inside. My husband's presence, once a comfort, now felt like a reminder of everything I had endured, everything I was too afraid to speak of. I avoided his eyes, avoided his questions, but eventually, the weight became too much. One evening, as he sat across from me at the dinner table, smiling as though the world was still whole, I felt the words clawing their way up my throat. "I need to tell you something," I whispered, my voice trembling. He looked up, concern flickering across his face. His smile faded as he set his fork down, waiting. My heart raced so fast it hurt. My hands shook. But still, I told him. I told him what his friends had done, how they had treated me when he wasn't there, how they had looked at me like I was nothing more than prey. I poured it all out in broken fragments, my voice cracking under the weight of the memory. When I finished, the silence between us was unbearable. I expected anger, outrage, disbelief, but what I saw in his eyes was worse. His face was unreadable, his expression caught between shock and something colder. Finally, he spoke, his words soft but cutting. I warned you they could be different when I wasn't around. His tone wasn't one of surprise. It was resignation, almost as if he had known all along. My chest tightened, and I felt my breath catch. You knew, I whispered, my voice breaking. He didn't answer right away. He looked down, running a hand over his face. I never thought they would go that far. I thought they respected me, respected you. But I guess I was wrong. His voice carried no rage, no urgency, just a quiet acceptance that felt like betrayal all over again. I stared at him, tears blurring my vision. How could he have left me alone with men he knew were capable of this? How could he call them his brothers when they had stripped me of every ounce of safety in my own home? My heart screamed for comfort, for him to hold me and tell me I wasn't alone. But instead, he sat in silence, distant, his face shadowed with thoughts he didn't share. A cruel doubt took root in me then. Had he left me with them on purpose? Was this some twisted test of loyalty? The idea was unbearable, and yet it clung to me like poison. That night, I lay awake beside him, the silence between us louder than any words. My marriage, once my safe haven, now felt like a fragile shell, hollow and broken. I didn't know if I could stay, or if I had the strength to leave. As I stared into the darkness, one truth became clear: betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it comes from the people closest to you, the ones you trusted with your heart. And once trust is broken, no amount of love can put it back the same way again.